George Washington was an American founding father, military officer who served as the first president of the United States from 1789 to 1797. He helped establish a national bank, suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, and established a trade relationship with Great Britain. The major diplomatic issues facing Washington included American Western settlers' conflicts with the Creek Nation, the resolution of problems derived from the Treaty of Paris of 1783. That ended the Revolution and the war between Great Britain and France. He avoided war with Britain by signing Jay's Treaty, which allowed Britain to seize cargo bound for French ports, and in return, Britain agreed to give up American ports. Britain granted U.S. Most Favored Nation status to ensure fair trading. The presidency of John Adams began on March 4, 1797, when John Adams was inaugurated as the second president of the United States, and ended on March 4, 1801. Adams, who had served as vice president under George Washington, took office as president after winning the 1796 presidential election. Before his presidency, he was a leader of the American Revolution that achieved independence from Great Britain. Adams signed the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts and built up the Army and Navy in the undeclared naval war with France. He was the first president to reside in the White House. Adams retired to his farm in Quincy. Here he penned his elaborate letters to Thomas Jefferson. Here on July 4, 1826, he whispered his last words. Thomas Jefferson survives. Thomas Jefferson, a spokesman for democracy, was an American founding father, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, 1776, and the third president of the United States, 1801 to 1809. He wanted to be remembered as the author of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was America's founding document. It created the United States of America. Jefferson was its principal author, although he received support and editing from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Jefferson favored a policy of neutrality in the European wars and was strongly committed to the principle of freedom of navigation for neutral vessels, including American ships. James Madison, the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, who served as the fourth president of the United States from 1809 to 1817. He was president of the United States during the War of 1812. Great Britain's seizure of American cargo and sailors drove Madison to side with the Warhawks. So he asked Congress for a declaration of war on June 1, 1812. Madison was politically active throughout the Revolution. He was named commander of the Orange County militia, but his poor health precluded any active military service. Along with his father, he sat on the Orange County Committee of Safety in 1775 and was a delegate to the Virginia Constitutional Convention in 1776. James Monroe was an American statesman, lawyer, diplomat, and founding father who served as the fifth president of the United States from 1817 to 1825. A member of the Democratic-Republican Party, his administration had a number of successes in foreign affairs, including the acquisition of Florida, the settlement of boundary issues with Britain, and the fashioning of the Monroe Doctrine. The president's relationship with his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, was vital in each of these cases. Following his retirement in 1825, Monroe was plagued by financial difficulties and died on July 4, 1831, in New York City, sharing a distinction with Presidents John Adams and Thomas Jefferson of dying on the anniversary of U.S. independence. Because none of the candidates for president garnered an electoral vote majority, the U.S. House of Representatives, under the provisions of the 12th Amendment, held a contingent election. On February 9, 1825, the House voted with each state delegation casting one vote to elect John Quincy Adams as the sixth President of the United States from 1825 to 1829. During his term, Adams encountered fierce criticism from the Jeffersonian Republicans and from some in his own party, led by his rival Alexander Hamilton. Adams signed the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts and built up the Army and Navy in the undeclared naval war with France. Andrew Jackson was an American lawyer, planter, general, and statesman who served as the seventh President of the United States from 1829 to 1837. Before his presidency, he gained fame as a general in the U.S. Army and served in both houses of the U.S. Congress. In 1832, he vetoed a bill by Congress to reauthorize the Second Bank of the United States, arguing that it was a corrupt institution. After a lengthy struggle, the bank was dismantled. In 1835, Jackson became the only president to pay off the national debt. Andrew Jackson died of chronic tuberculosis on June 8, 1845. Aged 78, his final words were, "Oh, do not cry. Be good children, and we shall all meet in heaven." When Van Buren took office in 1837, he became the first president who was born as a U.S. citizen. Almost immediately, he faced a national financial panic brought about in part by the transfer of federal funds from the Bank of the United States to state banks during Jackson's second term. Van Buren opposed any direct federal government intervention and cut back federal spending to maintain a balanced budget. He also presided over the establishment of the independent treasury system, a series of government vaults that replaced banks as the repository of federal funds. During the American Civil War, Van Buren was a war Democrat who supported the policies of President Abraham Lincoln, a Republican. He died of asthma at his home in Kinderhook in 1862, aged 79. William Henry Harrison was an American military officer and politician who served as the ninth President of the United States. Harrison died just 31 days after his inauguration as president in 1841, making his presidency the shortest in U.S. history. William Henry Harrison is known as the president with the longest inauguration speech and the shortest term. He was commander-in-chief for only 30 days, 12 hours, and 30 minutes. Harrison defeated Van Buren in the 1840 presidential election. Just 3 weeks after his inauguration, Harrison fell ill and died days later, after resolution of an ambiguity in the Constitution regarding succession to the powers and duties of the office. Tyler became president. John Tyler was the 10th President of the United States, serving from 1841 to 1845, after briefly holding office as the 10th Vice President in 1841. In 1842, Tyler did sign a tariff bill protecting northern manufacturers. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty ended a Canadian boundary dispute. In 1845, Texas was annexed. The administration of this state's writer strengthened the presidency, but it also increased sectional cleavage that led towards civil war. Tyler was the first president to have his veto of legislation overridden by Congress. He faced a stalemate on domestic policy, although he had several foreign policy achievements, including the Webster-Ashburton Treaty with Britain and the Treaty of Wangya with China. James Knox Polk was the 11th President of the United States, serving from 1845 to 1849 before he became president. Polk served as the 13th Speaker of the House of Representatives and 9th Governor of Tennessee. Polk is known for extending the territory of the United States through the Mexican-American War during his presidency, annexing the Republic of Texas, the Oregon Territory, and the Mexican Cession. After winning the Mexican-American War, Democrats nominated Polk as the nation's first dark horse candidate on the 9th ballot of the Democratic National Convention, after former President Martin Van Buren lost his bid because of his opposition to annexing Texas. a position deemed unacceptable by Southerners, and by former President Andrew Jackson. Zachary Taylor, a general and national hero in the United States Army from the time of the Mexican-American War and the War of 1812, was elected the 12th U.S. President, serving from March 1849 until his death in July 1850. One of the main issues during the Taylor presidency were the lands acquired from the victory in the Mexican-American War. Northerners and Southerners sharply disagreed over whether the territories wrested from Mexico should be open to slavery. Taylor fell ill on July 4th and died 5 days later. At the age of 65, officially he died from cholera morbus, and today, the prevalent theory is that Taylor suffered from gastroenteritis, an illness exacerbated by poor sanitary conditions in Washington. Millard Filmore was the 13th President of the United States, serving from 1850 to 1853, the last to be a member of the Whig Party while in the White House. Millard Filmore had a few nicknames: the Accidental President, because he assumed office upon the death of President Zachary Taylor. He shared this nickname with President John Tyler, who assumed office upon the death of President William Henry Harrison. Millard Filmore signed the Compromise of 1850, which delayed the Civil War for a decade. The compromise outlined that California would enter the Union as a free state. In exchange, the South was guaranteed that no federal restrictions on slavery would be placed on Utah Territory or New Mexico. Franklin Pierce was the 14th President of the United States, serving from 1853 to 1857. A Northern Democrat who believed that the abolitionist movement was a fundamental threat to the nation's unity. He alienated anti-slavery groups by signing the Kansas-Nebraska Act and enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. He was a Young America expansionist who signed the Gadsden Purchase of land from Mexico and led a failed attempt to acquire Cuba from Spain. The 1846-48 Mexican War took him into active military service as a brigade commander in General Winfield Scott's army. Pierce brought his troops in good order from New England to Veracruz, and then overland to join Scott in the field before Mexico City. James Buchanan Jr. was an American lawyer, diplomat, and politician who served as the 15th President of the United States from 1857 to 1861. He previously served as Secretary of State from 1845 to 1849 and represented Pennsylvania in both houses of the U.S. Congress. He was an advocate for states' rights, particularly regarding slavery, and minimized the role of the federal government preceding the Civil War. Historians and scholars rank Buchanan as among the worst presidents in American history. In his personal life, Buchanan never married and was the only U.S. president to remain a lifelong bachelor, leading some historians and authors to question his sexual orientation. Abraham Lincoln was an American lawyer, politician, and statesman who served as the 16th President of the United States from 1861 until his assassination in 1865. Lincoln's legacy is based on his momentous achievements. He successfully waged a political struggle and civil war that preserved the Union, ended slavery, and created the possibility of civil and social freedom for African Americans. Abraham Lincoln transformed the role of the president, allowing for the chief executive to hold full power over Congress and its other branches. He was strongly committed to the preservation of the Union at all costs, even if that meant defying Congress, the Supreme Court, and the Constitution in order to do so. Andrew Johnson was the 17th President of the United States, serving from 1865 to 1869. He assumed the presidency following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. As he was vice president at that time, Johnson believed that his greatest accomplishment as President of the United States was ensuring the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That law authorized the federal government to step in to safeguard the right of African Americans to register to vote and cast their ballots. Johnson was the first United States president to be impeached after the House formally adopted the Articles of Impeachment. They forwarded them to the United States Senate for adjudication. In 1865, as commanding general, Ulysses S Grant led the Union armies to victory over the Confederacy in the American Civil War. As an American hero, Grant was later elected the 18th President of the United States, 1869 to 1877, working to implement congressional reconstruction and to remove the vestiges of slavery. After 8 years in the presidential office during Reconstruction, Ulysses S. Grant looked forward to retirement from public life. When his second term in office ended in March 1877, Grant had gained weight while he desired to travel the world and visit his daughter in Scotland. On July 23, 1885, President Ulysses S. Grant died of throat cancer. Rutherford Hayes was an American military officer and politician who served as the 19th President of the United States from 1877 to 1881. During the American Civil War, Hayes served in the Union Army and earned a reputation for bravery in combat. Rising up the ranks to serve as Brevet Major General, Rutherford B. Hayes oversaw the end of Reconstruction, began the efforts that led to civil service reform, and attempted to reconcile the divisions left over from the Civil War. Hayes died of heart disease on January 17, 1893. A long funeral procession wound through the snowy Ohio countryside, led by President-elect Grover Cleveland and then Ohio Governor William McKinley. James Abram Garfield was the 20th President of the United States, serving from March 1881 until his death the following September. After being shot by an assassin in July, Garfield was elected to the Ohio Senate in 1859 as a Republican. During the secession crisis, he advocated coercing the seceding states back into the Union. In 1862, when Union military victories had been few, he successfully led a brigade at Middle Creek, Kentucky, against Confederate troops. Garfield's accomplishments as president included his assertion of presidential authority against senatorial courtesy in executive appointments, a purge of corruption in the post office, and his appointment of a Supreme Court justice. Chester Alan Arthur was an American politician who served as the 21st President of the United States from 1881 to 1885. He was a Republican lawyer from New York, who previously served as the 20th Vice President under President James A. Garfield. He was graduated from Union College in 1848, taught school, was admitted to the bar, and practiced law in New York City. Early in the Civil War, he served as Quartermaster General of the state of New York. Arthur vetoed the first version of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, arguing that its 20-year ban on Chinese immigrants to the United States violated the Burlingame Treaty, but he signed a second version, which included a 10-year ban. He appointed Horace Gray and Samuel Blatchford to the Supreme Court. Stephen Grover Cleveland was an American politician who served as the 22nd and 24th President of the United States from 1885 to 1889. And from 1893 to 1897, in the years before his presidency, he served as a mayor and governor in New York State, winning fame as an anti-corruption. His crusade for political reform and fiscal conservatism made him an icon for American conservatives of the time. Cleveland also won praise for honesty, self-reliance, integrity, and commitment to the principles of classical liberalism. Cleveland resisted the annexation of Hawaii and an American intervention in Cuba. He also sought to uphold the Monroe Doctrine and forced Great Britain to agree to arbitrata border dispute with Venezuela. Benjamin Harrison was an American politician who served as the 23rd President of the United States from 1889 to 1893. He was a member of the Harrison family of Virginia, a grandson of the 9th President, William Henry Harrison, and a great-grandson of Benjamin Harrison V, a founding father. The inauguration of Benjamin Harrison as the 23rd President of the United States took place on Monday, March 4, 1889, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 26th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only 4-year term of Benjamin Harrison as president. William McKinley was the 25th President of the United States, serving from 1897 until his assassination in 1901 at the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. McKinley was working as a school teacher in Ohio. In June 1861, he left his teaching position and enlisted in the Union Army as a private in the newly formed 23d Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, also known as the Poland Guards. He presided over victory in the Spanish-American War of 1898, gained control of Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Cuba, restored prosperity after a deep depression, rejected the inflationary monetary policy of free silver, keeping the nation on the gold standard, and raised protective tariffs. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was an American politician, statesman, conservationist, naturalist, and writer who served as the 26th President of the United States from 1901 to 1909. His successful efforts to broker the end of the Russo-Japanese War won him the 1906 Nobel Peace Prize, making him the first American to ever win a Nobel Prize. Roosevelt was elected to a full term in 1904 and promoted policies more to the left, despite growing opposition from Republican leaders. His presidency saw the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act, which established the Food and Drug Administration to regulate food safety, and the Hepburn Act, which increased the regulatory power of the Interstate Commerce Commission. William Howard Taft was the 27th President of the United States and the 10th Chief Justice of the United States, the only person to have held both offices. Taft, in life weighing 330 pounds, in death is haunted by the rumor that he had to be buried in a piano box, which isn't true, but hard to forget. President Taft was more committed to the expansion of U.S. foreign trade than was Roosevelt. He pursued a program known as dollar diplomacy, designed to encourage U.S. investments in South and Central America, the Caribbean, and the Far East. Thomas Woodrow Wilson was an American politician and academic who served as the 28th President of the United States from 1913 to 1921. As president, Wilson changed the nation's economic policies and led the United States into World War I in 1917. He was the leading architect of the League of Nations, and his progressive stance on foreign policy came to be known as Wilsonianism. President Woodrow Wilson of the United States won the Peace Prize for 1919 as the leading architect behind the League of Nations. Warren Gamaliel Harding was the 29th President of the United States, serving from 1921 until his death in 1923. A member of the Republican Party, he was one of the most popular sitting U.S. presidents. Return to normalcy was a campaign slogan used by Warren G. Harding during the 1920 United States presidential election. Harding won the election with 60.4% of the popular vote. Harding was the first to call for a return to normalcy. Warren G. Harding died as one of the most popular presidents in history, but the subsequent exposure of the scandals eroded his popular regard, as did revelations of several extramarital affairs. In historical rankings during the decades after his term in office, Harding was often rated among the worst. Calvin Coolidge was an American attorney and politician who served as the 30th President of the United States from 1923 to 1929. Born in Vermont, Coolidge was a Republican lawyer from New England who climbed the ladder of Massachusetts politics, becoming the state's 48th governor. In foreign policy, Coolidge continued to keep the United States out of membership or major engagement with the League of Nations. However, he supported disarmament agreements and sponsored the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928 to outlaw most wars. Coolidge was greatly admired during his time in office, and he surprised many by declining to seek another term. Public opinion on Coolidge soured shortly after he left office, as the nation plunged into the Great Depression. Herbert Clark Hoover was an American politician who served as the 31st President of the United States from 1929 to 1933. A member of the Republican Party, he held office during the onset of the Great Depression. In 1917, after the United States entered the war, Hoover was named to head the U.S. Food Administration. Hoover was the right man for the job, which guided the effort to conserve resources and supplies and to feed America's European allies. He became famous as his country's food czar. After the war, Hoover led the American Relief Administration, which provided food to the starving millions in Central and Eastern Europe, especially Russia. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served as the 32nd President of the United States from 1933 until his death in 1945. He remains the only president to serve for more than 2 terms. Unlike his first 2 terms, Roosevelt's third and fourth terms were dominated by foreign policy concerns, as the United States became involved in World War II. In December 1941, he led the United States through the Great Depression and World War II. The New Deal permanently and dramatically transformed the politics and economy of the United States. Roosevelt led the nation through the Second World War. Roosevelt built a powerful wartime coalition with Britain and the Soviet Union and led the nation to victory against Nazi Germany. Harry S. Truman was the 33rd President of the United States, serving from 1945 to 1953.
With the Truman Doctrine,
President Harry S. Truman established that to contain and prevent the communist sphere of influence in governments around the world, specifically around Asia and Europe, and prevent the Soviet Union from growing. Truman presided over the onset of the Cold War in 1947. He oversaw the Berlin Airlift and Marshall Plan in 1948, with the involvement of the U.S. in the Korean War of 1950 to 1953. South Korea repelled the invasion by North Korea. Truman authorized the first and only use of nuclear weapons in war against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender and the end of the World War. Dwight D Eisenhower was an American military officer and statesman who served as the 34th President of the United States from 1953 to 1961. During World War II, he was Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe and achieved the 5-star rank as General of the Army. Eisenhower planned and supervised 2 of the most consequential military campaigns of World War II, Operation Torch in the North Africa Campaign in 1942 to 1943 and the invasion of Normandy in 1944. Korea was central to Eisenhower's 1952 presidential campaign and his interactions with troops at the front lines of the war in December 1952. Heavily influenced his push for an armistice, which took place on July 27, 1953. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who served as the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until his assassination in 1963. He was the youngest person elected president and the youngest president at the end of his tenure. The peaceful resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was one of President Kennedy's greatest diplomatic achievements? 3 months after the crisis was resolved, the Department of Defense conducted a televised press briefing, chronicling the Soviet Union's buildup and subsequent removal of nuclear weapons from Cuba. On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, and Jacqueline Kennedy planned the president's state funeral, which was watched by millions around the world who shared her grief and admired her courage and dignity. Lyndon Johnson, who served as the 36th President of the United States from 1963 to 1969. He became president after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Johnson's Great Society was aimed at expanding civil rights, public broadcasting, access to health care, aid to education and the arts, urban and rural development, and public services. He sought to create better living conditions for low-income Americans by spearheading the war on poverty. Johnson pursued conciliatory policies with the Soviet Union, but stopping well short of the détente policy Richard Nixon introduced in the 1970s. He was instead committed to the traditional policy of containment, seeking to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. Richard Milhous Nixon was the 37th President of the United States, serving from 1969 to 1974. Nixon imposed wage and price controls for 90 days, began the war on cancer, and presided over the Apollo 11 moon landing, which signaled the end of the space race. He was re-elected with a historic electoral landslide in 1972 when he defeated Democratic candidate George McGovern. Nixon ended American involvement in Vietnam combat in 1973, and the military draft in the same year. His visit to China in 1972 eventually led to diplomatic relations between the two nations, and he also then concluded the anti-ballistic missile treaty with the Soviet Union. Ford, a Republican from Michigan, had been appointed vice president since December 6, 1973, following the resignation of Spiro Agnew from that office. Ford was the only person to serve as president without being elected to either the presidency or the vice presidency. Domestically, Gerald Ford, the 38th U.S. president, presided over the worst economy in the 4 decades since the Great Depression, with growing inflation and a recession. In one of his most controversial acts, he granted a presidential pardon to Nixon for his role in the Watergate scandal. Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. president, in an effort to end the Arab-Israeli conflict, he helped arrange the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. Through the Torrijos-Carter treaties, Carter guaranteed the eventual transfer of the Panama Canal to Panama. His final year was marred by the Iran hostage crisis, which contributed to his losing the 1980 election to Ronald Reagan. Whistleblowers have alleged, most recently, that people working on the Reagan campaign's behalf convinced Iran to prolong the crisis to reduce Carter's chance of re-election. Ronald Wilson Reagan was an American politician and actor who served as the 40th President of the United States from 1981 to 1989. Upon taking office, Reagan argued that the United States faced a dire crisis, and that the best way to address this crisis was through conservative reforms. His major policy priorities were increasing military spending, cutting taxes, reducing non-military federal spending, and restricting federal regulations. In his first term, Reagan implemented Reaganomics, which involved economic deregulation and cuts in both taxes and government spending. During a period of stagflation, he escalated an arms race and transitioned Cold War policy away from détente with the Soviet Union. George Herbert Walker Bush, who served as the 41st President of the United States from 1989 to 1993, end of the Cold War, the most significant foreign policy achievement of the Bush administration, was overseeing the peaceful end of the Cold War. Bush played a crucial role in managing the transition as the Soviet Union dissolved, ensuring stability and avoiding a potential conflict between the two superpowers. Foreign policy drove Bush's presidency as he navigated the final years of the Cold War and played a key role in the reunification of Germany. He presided over the invasion of Panama and the Gulf War, ending the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait in the latter conflict. William Jefferson Clinton is an American politician who served as the 42nd President of the United States from 1993 to 2001. He took office at the end of the Cold War. Clinton was the first president from the baby boomer generation. He was 46 years old when he was elected, making him the third youngest president. He was impeached in 1998 for lying about a sexual relationship with former White House intern Monica Lewinsky. Since leaving office, Clinton has been involved in public speaking and humanitarian work. He created the Clinton Foundation to address international causes, such as the prevention of HIV or AIDS and global warming. George Walker Bush, born July 6, 1946, is an American politician who served as the 43rd President of the United States. From 2001 to 2009, a member of the Republican Party, he previously served as the 46th Governor of Texas from 1995 to 2000. New Haven, Connecticut, U.S., he ordered an invasion of Afghanistan in an effort to overthrow the Taliban, destroy al-Qaeda, and capture Osama bin Laden. He also signed the controversial Patriot Act in order to authorize surveillance of suspected terrorists. Obama served as the 44th President of the United States, 2009 to 2017, and was the first African American to hold that post. A member of the Democratic Party, Obama previously represented Illinois in the U.S. Senate from 2005 to 2008. He was honored with the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. In foreign policy, he increased U.S. troop levels in Afghanistan, reduced nuclear weapons with the United States-Russia New START Treaty, and ended military involvement in the Iraq War. In 2011, Obama ordered the drone strike killing in Yemen of al-Qaeda operative Anwar al-Awlaki, who was an American citizen. Donald John Trump, born June 14, 1946, is an American politician, media personality, and businessman who served as the 45th President of the United States from 2017 to 2021. The administration implemented a major arms sale to Saudi Arabia, denied citizens from several Muslim-majority countries entry into the United States, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and brokered the Abraham Accords, a series of normalization agreements between Israel and various Arab states. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is an American politician who is the 46th and current President of the United States, a member of the Democratic Party. He previously served as the 47th Vice President from 2009 to 2017 under President Barack Obama. It took Biden 3 tries to get to the White House, the first two 1988 and 2008 flaming out early and embarrassingly. And even his final winning campaign in 2020 struggled to gain traction and seemed headed for defeat until it got a last-minute rescue from a powerful South Carolina congressman.